For 800 years, no foreign army had set foot inside the city of Rome. Gauls had burned its outskirts 8 centuries earlier and never returned. Hannibal himself, the most feared general in the ancient world, marched within sight of its walls and turned away. Rome was not just a city. It was an idea, the fixed, unmovable center of the known world, a place so sacred to its own legend that the thought of its capture had become almost unthinkable, even as an insult. Then, on the night of August the 24th in the year 410, the gates simply opened. Not broken, not stormed, opened from the inside by hands that belonged to Rome itself. Somewhere in the darkness along the Salarian Way, a bar was lifted, a bolt was drawn back, and the largest city on earth, home to perhaps 800,000 people who had gone to sleep that night believing, as their ancestors always had, that Rome simply did not fall. That city lay open to an army it had spent 15 years refusing to even properly negotiate with. The man standing outside those gates that night had spent most of his life trying to become part of the empire he was now about to destroy. His name was Alaric, born into Gothic nobility along the lower Danube in territory that existed only because Rome itself had allowed his people to settle there decades earlier. In the chaotic years following the disaster at Adrianople, Alaric did not grow up dreaming of burning Rome to the ground. He grew up serving it. As a young commander, he led Gothic soldiers fighting under the Roman banner, most notably at the brutal Battle of the Frigidus River in 394, where Gothic troops were thrown into the worst of the fighting and suffered catastrophic losses, securing a victory for the Roman Emperor Theodosius. Alaric expected that service to be rewarded. He wanted formal recognition as a Roman general, a proper command within the imperial military structure, the kind of legitimate authority that came with land, salary, and rank. What he received instead was silence, delay, and quiet condescension from a Roman aristocracy that saw him, no matter how many battles he won for them, as a barbarian who happened to be useful. When Theodosius died in 395, the empire split between his 2 young, weak sons, Arcadius in the east, Honorius in the west. And the fragile promises made to men like Alaric were among the first casualties of the political chaos that followed. For over a decade, Alaric alternated between raiding Roman territory and negotiating with it, a cycle of violence and diplomacy that reflected exactly what he wanted. Not Rome's destruction, but Rome's respect. He marched through Greece, threatened Italy, and was repeatedly outmaneuvered, bought off, or narrowly defeated by one man who understood him better than anyone else in the Roman government, a half-Vandal general named Stilicho, the most powerful military figure in the Western Empire and the true authority behind the throne of the ineffective young emperor Honorius. Stilicho and Alaric fought each other for years, yet some ancient sources suggest a far stranger relationship beneath the surface. Quiet arrangements, private understandings, even the possibility that Stilicho intended to eventually use Alaric's forces for his own political purposes within a fractured empire. Whatever the truth, Stilicho was the one man capable of managing the Gothic threat without losing Italy entirely. And in 408, the Roman government destroyed him. Paranoid rivals at the imperial court convinced the young emperor Honorius that Stilicho was secretly conspiring with Alaric to seize the throne for his own son. It was the kind of accusation that thrives in a court run by frightened, ambitious men rather than capable ones. And Honorius, weak-willed and easily led his entire life, believed it without much resistance. Whether the accusation held any truth barely mattered. Stilicho was arrested at Ravenna and executed in 408. His allies purged across the Western Empire in a wave of politically motivated killings that removed an entire generation of experienced military leadership in a matter of weeks. His authority, built over more than a decade of holding the Western Empire together almost single-handedly, was erased almost overnight. It was, in hindsight, one of the most catastrophic acts of political self-harm in the empire's history. Rome had just removed the only man who knew how to contain the storm gathering outside its walls, replacing him with nothing but suspicion and a royal court that trusted no one competent enough to actually lead. What followed made the crisis exponentially worse. In the wake of Stilicho's fall, panicked Roman officials unleashed violent pogroms against the families of Gothic soldiers still serving loyally within the Roman army across Italy, slaughtering wives and children in what was meant to be a purge of suspected traitors. Tens of thousands of Gothic soldiers, men who had spent years fighting under the Roman eagle, now watched their own families murdered by the empire they served. They did not hesitate. They defected to Alaric almost immediately, doubling the size of his army overnight and erasing whatever restraint had kept him from marching on Rome itself. Alaric moved south into Italy with a force now large enough and angry enough that negotiation was no longer his only option. In 409, he laid siege to Rome for the first time, cutting off its food supply along the Tiber until starvation forced the Senate to the negotiating table. Roman writers who lived through it described a city eating through its granaries within weeks, then turning to whatever remained after that. Rumors, probably exaggerated but repeated with real horror at the time, even spoke of citizens reduced to cannibalism before the Senate finally broke. The ransom Alaric extracted was almost unimaginable. Thousands of pounds of gold and silver, silk garments, spices, and the melted-down remains of pagan statues the desperate Senate stripped from its own temples to make the payment, including, according to some accounts, a great bronze statue said to represent valor itself, melted down along with everything else the city still had left to give. It worked, temporarily. Alaric withdrew, but the message had already been sent to the entire Roman world. The Eternal City could be starved into paying tribute like any conquered province. A second confrontation followed within months, this time ending not in ransom but in farce. Alaric, frustrated by Honorius's refusal to grant him the formal command he still wanted, marched on Rome again and forced the Senate to crown a puppet emperor of his own choosing, a Roman senator named Priscus Attalus. It was a humiliating spectacle for everyone involved. A barbarian general effectively appointing, and then within months publicly stripping the title from a Roman emperor when Attalus failed to prove useful. Honorius, safely fortified in the marshy, well-defended city of Ravenna, refused every offer Alaric made. There would be no treaty, no command, no recognition. By the summer of 410, more than 15 years after Alaric had first asked Rome for nothing more than the rank he believed he had earned, patience had run out entirely. He marched on Rome a third time, and this time he did not come to negotiate. The exact details of what happened on the night the gates opened remain genuinely disputed among ancient historians, and that uncertainty is itself part of the horror. One tradition, recorded generations later, claims a Roman noblewoman named Proba, watching her city starve and her people die in the streets, ordered her own household slaves to quietly open the Salarian gate under cover of darkness, choosing a controlled surrender over continued suffering. Another account claims it was Gothic slaves already living within the city, perhaps sympathetic to Alaric's cause, who unbarred the gate themselves. What every source agrees on is the essential, unbearable fact. The city that had never fallen to a foreign army in 800 years was not broken open by force. It was let in. Alaric's forces poured through the darkness into streets that had not heard the sound of an invading army in living memory, or in any memory at all. Panic spread faster than the soldiers themselves. Wealthy households barricaded their doors. Ordinary citizens fled toward whatever sanctuary they could reach. And what followed for the next 3 days has been remembered, debated, and in some ways surprisingly reconsidered by historians ever since. By the brutal standards of ancient warfare, the sack of Rome was, in certain specific respects, remarkably restrained. Alaric himself was an Arian Christian, and ancient sources report that he issued direct orders protecting anyone who took refuge inside the city's churches, particularly the great Basilica of St. Peter. which by several accounts was left almost entirely untouched even as chaos consumed the streets around it. This was not mercy in any complete sense. Looting was widespread, some buildings burned, and prominent Roman families, including members of the imperial household itself, were seized and held for ransom or taken as captives. Most famously, Galla Placidia, the half-sister of Emperor Honorius, who would spend the following years as a hostage of the very people who had just sacked her family's capital. Her story alone reads like something no historian would dare invent if it weren't documented. A Roman princess marched south with a Gothic army, eventually marrying Alaric's own brother-in-law and successor, Athalf, in a wedding celebrated with Roman songs and Roman customs, presented by the Goths themselves not as a humiliation of their captive, but as a genuine union between two peoples. She would later return to Roman politics entirely, eventually ruling the Western Empire herself as regent for her young son. A twist of fate no Roman senator watching the sack unfold could possibly have predicted. Other aristocratic families fared far worse, stripped of generations of wealth in a single night, their household slaves and freedmen scattering into a city that no longer had any functioning authority to protect them. Some fled south toward Africa carrying what little they could, part of a wave of Roman refugees that would permanently reshape the demographics of the empire's remaining provinces. But restraint compared to other ancient sackings did almost nothing to soften the psychological impact of the event itself. It was never really about how much material damage the city suffered. It was about the fact that it had happened at all. The shockwaves reached every corner of the Roman world within weeks. In Bethlehem, the scholar and theologian Jerome, then translating scripture in quiet isolation, received the news and wrote that his voice caught in his throat, that sobs interrupted his words as he dictated because the city that had conquered the entire world had itself finally been conquered.